Karen jumps on stage at school play because her kid deserved the lead role. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The elementary school auditorium buzzed with excitement, filled with the kind of anticipation that only a school play could bring. Parents, grandparents, and siblings all gathered in the cramped seats, some of them taking pictures, others chatting quietly as they waited for the performance to begin. The air was thick with the smell of popcorn and the faint scent of freshly painted sets. Kids fidgeted in their costumes backstage, their voices a mix of nervous excitement and practiced lines. The atmosphere was lively, yet somehow warm and welcoming, as parents whispered to each other about their little ones' roles, exchanging smiles and reassurances. It was one of those evenings where everyone in the auditorium shared a common goal, to witness the joy and pride of children stepping into the spotlight, no matter how small their role. But for Karen, this was more than just a typical school event, it was an opportunity to right a perceived wrong. Karen had been a fixture at every school event, always there with her oversized purse, a camera hanging around her neck, and an air of authority that she had cultivated over the years. She was known to every teacher, every principal, and most of the staff, but not always in the way one might expect. Karen didn't just attend school functions, she managed them in her own mind, always offering unsolicited advice or making her opinion known about what should or shouldn't be done. This particular evening, however, was more important to her than any other school event had ever been. It wasn't just any holiday play, it was the holiday play, the one where her son, Jacob, was supposed to shine. He was going to be the lead in the play, the main character, the one who stole the show. But that wasn't the case. Not anymore. Karen's fingers tapped nervously on the armrest of her seat, her eyes scanning the stage as the lights dimmed and the music began. She had been in the audience for nearly an hour, and while the play itself was charming, it wasn't her son who was leading the show. No, someone else had been cast in the role that Karen had believed was destined for Jacob. He had rehearsed for weeks, practiced his lines over and over again, and while he wasn't the most polished, she had been certain he would at least be given the chance to prove himself. But as the curtain rose, there was a young boy, not her son, standing center stage, dressed in a shiny red costume, playing the role of the lead character. Karen's heart sank as she watched the performance unfold. The child on stage was good, perhaps even better than she had expected Jacob to be, but that wasn't the point. In her mind, the lead role was supposed to be Jacob's. He had earned it, in her eyes, and no one was going to tell her otherwise. The longer the play went on, the more her frustration grew. She could see it in the way the other parents whispered excitedly, applauded enthusiastically, they were all so impressed with this kid, but where was her son? Her chest tightened with each passing moment, the injustice of it all building inside her. She had been patient, but there was only so much she could take. Finally, as the actor playing the lead delivered his lines with an exaggerated flourish, Karen stood up abruptly, causing a ripple of discomfort among the parents seated near her. She glanced around the room, her eyes scanning the rows of chairs for any sign of dissent. No one dared challenge her. With a swift motion, she pushed through the aisle, her heels clicking sharply against the wooden floor, each step purposeful and determined. She had made up her mind, her son was going to take that lead role, no matter what. She reached the stage entrance, and the staff members standing at the side gave her a questioning look. It didn't matter. She wasn't here to ask for permission, she was here to make it happen. Without a word, she pushed past the staff, moving behind the curtain and toward the child who was standing center stage. The young boy was so caught up in his lines and the performance that he didn't notice Karen's presence behind him. With one swift movement, Karen reached up and yanked the boy's costume off, causing him to stumble and gasp in confusion. The audience gasped too, their collective attention snapping to the unfolding chaos. The boy's face twisted in confusion as he looked to his teacher and then back at Karen, who stood tall, her hands on her hips, as if she had every right to be there. The other actors froze, unsure of how to proceed, the music trailing off into an awkward silence. "This is unacceptable," Karen shouted, her voice ringing throughout the auditorium. "My son was supposed to be the lead. He has worked so hard for this role, and you've stolen it from him. My son deserves to be up there." Her voice echoed with an anger that seemed to radiate through the walls of the small auditorium. The audience sat in stunned silence, unsure of what to do next. Karen was unstoppable now, her mind racing ahead of her actions. She could hear the murmurs behind her. Some people were shocked, some were whispering to each other, while others, the more daring ones, began to exchange looks that mixed confusion with judgment. "Jacob!" Karen screamed, turning toward the side of the stage, her voice trembling with urgency. "Jacob, get up here now. It's your turn. You've earned this role. They're not going to take it from you." At this point, several parents and staff members sprang into action, rushing toward the stage, but Karen was already too far gone. The stagehand closest to her tried to stop her, reaching out a hand to block her path, but she shoved it aside. "Don't touch me," she yelled, her anger now fully unleashed, her face flushed with the force of her conviction. "This is about my son, and I won't let you ruin his chance." Jacob, hearing his name shouted across the auditorium, hurried from the wings, his face a mix of confusion and excitement. He had no idea what was going on, but he saw the look in his mother's eyes and followed her direction without question. He ran up to the stage, the confusion in the audience rising to a crescendo as the lights flashed uncomfortably on the two of them. Karen yanked the startled boy who had been in the lead role off to the side of the stage and handed Jacob the boy's costume. "Here," she said curtly, "this is yours. Get on that stage, now." The chaos was palpable. Some in the audience began to murmur loudly, their discomfort and disapproval evident. A few audience members had already reached for their phones, pointing them toward the stage. Someone, likely a parent, was seen dialing security. And then it happened. Mid-scene, in front of everyone, Karen's actions were too much for the others to ignore. "Security," shouted a teacher from the back of the room, clearly panicked. "We need help." Karen's eyes widened, her own panic setting in now. It wasn't the victory she had imagined. It was chaos, confusion, and the painful realization that her actions had spiraled far out of control. The scene unraveled quickly as two security guards entered from the back of the auditorium, pushing through the aisles toward the stage. They spoke briefly to the staff members, who gestured toward Karen. Security's presence only amplified the drama unfolding. As the officers reached her, Karen realized there was no going back. "Ma'am," one of the guards said firmly, "you need to leave the stage. Now." The word stung more than she expected. For a fleeting moment, Karen hesitated, as if the weight of the situation hit her all at once. She had jumped on stage to correct a perceived injustice, but now, with the entire auditorium watching her, she had become the spectacle. As the guards escorted her away, her mind began to clear, but it was too late. The damage had been done. The performance had been interrupted, her son confused, and the audience left stunned. Karen had tried to force her will on the situation, and now she could only walk away from it. The sound of footsteps following her out of the auditorium was the final reminder that she had lost, not just the role for her son, but something far more important, her dignity. The scene on stage unfolded without incident, the actors performing their lines, the audience engaged in the moment, all of it moving forward just as it was meant to. Jacob, in his small role, had played his part without a hitch, smiling through the scripted lines that were expected of him. He wasn't the star, not by any means, but for him, being part of the play was enough. Karen sat in the audience, her eyes trained on the stage, but her mind was far away, fixated on one thing, her son, Jacob, and the role that should have been his. The more she watched, the more frustrated she became. The lead was supposed to be Jacob's. She had imagined it, dreamed about it, and even spoken to the teacher about it in passing weeks before. It was his time to shine, his moment to step up and show everyone what he was capable of. She had no doubts in her mind that Jacob deserved to be the center of attention. But as the play continued, Karen could see with clarity that the role she had envisioned for her son was being carried by someone else, a girl, an overly confident little actress with a voice just a little too loud and a smile just a little too bright. Karen had watched her throughout the rehearsal, and though the child was good, she wasn't her child. This wasn't fair. This wasn't right. Her frustration began to take over, eating away at her as she shifted uncomfortably in her seat. The people around her seemed to be oblivious, focused on the action unfolding before them, applauding at the right moments and laughing at the jokes, but Karen's eyes were fixed on one thing and one thing only, the stage. Every line the young girl delivered seemed to dig into Karen's chest, every laugh from the audience only making her feel more and more alienated. She knew her son, Jacob, had what it took to carry the lead. He had rehearsed every line, worked through his nerves, and prepared himself for this moment, but someone else had taken it from him. She felt the weight of that injustice sink into her like a lead weight, her chest tightening as she watched the girl confidently stand in the spotlight while Jacob stood on the sidelines, an afterthought in his small, inconspicuous role. Karen's hands trembled as she clenched the armrests of her seat. The thought of it, the idea of her son being overlooked, being treated as less than he deserved, was more than she could bear. She wasn't going to let this slide. No, she wasn't going to sit quietly and watch someone else take what was rightfully her son's. As the play went on, her thoughts became louder, her resolve firmer. Her pulse quickened as the light-hearted atmosphere of the auditorium seemed to shift in her mind, morphing into something darker, something more urgent. The other parents were enjoying the show, watching the kids play their roles, applauding them, but Karen wasn't interested in their approval. She wasn't interested in the play anymore. What mattered now was that her son was being denied what he deserved. She couldn't stand it any longer. She had to act. The voice in her head grew louder, urging her to make a scene, to do something. She wasn't just going to sit here and let them get away with this injustice. She was the mother, and mothers didn't stand idly by when their children were treated unfairly. She stood up abruptly, ignoring the surprised glances from the other parents around her. The small, rustling sound of her dress shifting as she rose was drowned out by the murmurs of the audience. The lights were low, the action on stage continuing, but Karen had already decided. She would make her move. She would show everyone just how wrong this was. This wasn't just about a role in a play, it was about her son, his future, his confidence. And she wasn't going to let this girl, or anyone else, steal this moment. Not today. She marched down the aisle with purpose, her heels clicking loudly against the floor, the sound echoing in the otherwise quiet auditorium. The murmurs grew louder as she passed, but Karen wasn't listening. She could already see the stage in front of her, the child in the lead role, the one who had no right to be there. Her eyes burned with determination as she reached the side of the stage. The worker who was standing at the entrance, ushering kids in and out, tried to stop her with a polite, "Ma'am, please return to your seat." But Karen's mind was set. She wasn't here to be polite, she wasn't here to follow the rules. She was here to fix what had been broken. Without waiting for permission or even acknowledging the staff member's words, Karen pushed past him, stepping onto the stage. The audience gasped in unison, and for the briefest of moments, the play was forgotten, every pair of eyes now on her. She strode confidently toward the center of the stage, where the little girl was mid-scene, a wide smile on her face as she delivered her lines. Karen reached out, her hand grabbing the girl's costume roughly, pulling it away. The child stumbled back in shock, her eyes wide with confusion as Karen forcefully yanked the costume from her. The music halted as the audience collectively gasped. The children on stage froze, unsure of what to do next. "This is ridiculous," Karen shouted, her voice ringing throughout the auditorium. "My son deserves the lead role. Not her. Jacob is supposed to be the one in this costume. He's worked for it, and you know it." She turned toward the audience, her eyes blazing. "The customer is always right, and in this case, the mother is always right. My son deserves this, and I won't let this travesty continue for one more second." The audience, stunned into silence, was left in a dazed stillness. Some of the parents began to murmur, others shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unsure of what to make of the spectacle unfolding before them. The teachers backstage started to scramble, whispering to one another, trying to understand what had just happened. One of the teachers, likely the director of the play, quickly appeared on the stage, attempting to usher Karen off. "Ma'am," the teacher said, her voice strained, "this is highly inappropriate. Please step off the stage." This is not how we handle things here. But Karen was beyond reason, beyond caring. She was locked in on one goal, to get her son the lead. She turned around and waved her hand toward the wings of the stage. Jacob, get up here. This is your role, and no one's going to stop you. A confused murmur ran through the audience as Jacob, who had been waiting backstage, stepped hesitantly into the spotlight. He was dressed in his minor costume, a small supporting role in the play, but Karen's voice had made it clear, this wasn't what he deserved. This wasn't what he had earned. As Jacob approached, the audience's confusion turned into murmurs of concern, some parents glancing at one another, unsure if this was part of the performance or a real disruption. Before anything could unfold further, a parent, clearly alarmed by the chaos, stood up and shouted for security. A few moments later, 2 security guards entered the auditorium, their presence cutting through the tension like a knife. Karen continued to shout, her voice now cracking with emotion, he's worked so hard for this. He deserves this role more than anyone. The security guards moved swiftly, positioning themselves near the stage. They addressed Karen with a calm but firm tone, telling her she needed to leave the stage immediately, but Karen was beyond reason, shaking her head. You don't understand, she screamed, the desperation in her voice now clearly audible to everyone around her. This is my son's moment. The lights overhead flickered slightly as the tension in the room reached a peak. The security guards, one of them gently guiding Jacob off stage, continued to speak to Karen, urging her to leave before things escalated further. But it was too late. Karen's scene was already written, and there was no taking it back now. Her disruption had taken away from her son's moment, and what should have been a holiday play filled with joy had become a scene of chaos and embarrassment. The tension in the room had reached an unbearable peak as Karen was ushered off stage by the security guards, the overwhelming sense of humiliation slowly creeping over her as the audience's eyes followed her every movement. Her heart pounded in her chest as she stepped away from the chaos, a quiet but uncomfortable murmur spreading through the audience like a ripple across the surface of a still pond. She couldn't believe what had just happened. Her mind was still reeling, her emotions a whirlwind of anger, frustration, and regret. As she walked back down the aisle, her shoulders hunched, her head held high only in defiance, she could feel the judgment in the air. Parents whispered to each other, some glancing back at her with expressions of disbelief, while others pointed their fingers, their eyes filled with disdain. Karen tried to ignore it, but the weight of their gaze pressed down on her like an invisible hand. She had acted without thinking, too wrapped up in her own sense of entitlement to see the bigger picture, to recognize the consequences of her actions. And now, as the security guards returned to their posts and the children on stage tried to regain their composure, the reality of what she had done began to settle in. The silence in the auditorium was thick, the atmosphere cold and heavy, as if the very air had been sucked out of the room. The performance had come to an abrupt halt, and the children, caught in the middle of Karen's outburst, were left standing there, uncertain of how to proceed. The girl who had been playing the lead role looked terrified, her costume still half on, her body frozen in confusion. She wasn't sure whether to continue or wait for instructions, and the other actors stood awkwardly in the background, unsure of what was happening. The director, now visibly distressed, quickly stepped in to salvage what was left of the performance. She motioned for the children to regroup and began whispering frantically to the backstage crew, trying to decide how to move forward. But Karen had already seen enough. As she made her way toward the exit, she felt her face flush with embarrassment. She could hear the whispers behind her, the low, disbelieving murmurs that seemed to grow louder with each step she took. She had become the spectacle, the center of attention, and not in the way she had imagined. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. This wasn't how she had pictured her son finally being recognized for all his hard work, for all the effort he had put into rehearsing his lines. Instead, she had made a fool of herself in front of everyone. She had ruined it. The realization was sinking in slowly but surely. The fight she had started in the name of justice for her son had only served to rob him of the moment he should have had. Karen pushed open the heavy doors to the auditorium and stepped into the empty hallway, the noise from the play now muffled behind her. The adrenaline that had fueled her earlier was gone, replaced by a deep, gnawing emptiness. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her phone, pulling it out of her purse and quickly checking for messages. She hadn't even noticed that the play had continued for a few minutes without her. She could see several missed calls from her husband, each one growing more urgent, more insistent, and several text messages from friends and family members. Some were supportive, asking what had happened, while others were far less understanding. She could already imagine the messages she would receive once people started talking about her outburst. Her stomach churned at the thought, but there was no denying that she had crossed the line. She couldn't take back what she had done, couldn't undo the scene she had created in front of everyone. Karen leaned against the cold wall of the hallway, her breath shallow as she tried to steady herself. She had acted on impulse, letting her emotions drive her to a place of no return. She had told herself that she was standing up for her son, that he deserved more, but she had done nothing but tarnish his moment and her own reputation. The humiliation she felt now was a bitter pill to swallow. She thought of the other children on stage, their joy and excitement now overshadowed by her interruption. They had worked so hard, rehearsed for weeks, and she had taken it all away from them, just to prove a point that, in the end, didn't matter. Karen's mind began to replay the moment over and over again, each second feeling longer than the last. She saw herself storming onto the stage, grabbing the lead role's costume, the shocked faces of the children around her, and the confused expression on her son's face as she tried to force him into a role that wasn't his. She had pushed past every boundary, every expectation of decency, and now she was left with the fallout. Her son, Jacob, had watched her, his eyes filled with confusion and a touch of fear, as if he didn't understand why his mother had done what she did. She could only imagine how he felt now, embarrassed, perhaps, or even ashamed of the spectacle she had created. It didn't take long for the principal to appear, his face a mix of frustration and concern as he approached Karen in the hallway. She straightened up, wiping her eyes quickly as if she could erase the tears that had started to well up. She wasn't going to cry in front of him, not after everything she had done. But the principal's voice was firm as he addressed her. "Karen," he said quietly, his tone stern but not unkind, "I need to ask you to leave. You've disrupted the play, and it's causing unnecessary stress for the children, the staff, and the parents. This behavior is unacceptable, and I'm afraid we'll have to speak to you further about this incident." Karen nodded slowly, her heart sinking at his words. She had expected this, had known there would be consequences for her actions, but hearing it from the principal felt like another blow. "I didn't mean to cause trouble," she muttered, her voice shaking. "I just wanted to make sure Jacob had his chance. He deserved it." The principal sighed, clearly weary. "I understand that you want what's best for your son, but this wasn't the way to go about it. Jacob is a part of the play, and that's enough. Everyone has their role, and everyone deserves a chance to shine in their own way. No one gets to take that from them. Not even you." Karen's heart ached at his words. He was right. She had taken something from her son, something he would never get back. She had wanted him to be the star, but in doing so, she had stolen the spotlight from him and the other children. She had turned a moment meant to be joyful into one of chaos and confusion. As the principal walked away, Karen stood there in the hallway, her mind clouded with regret and guilt. The sounds of the play echoed in the distance, and she realized that she couldn't just walk away from this. The damage had been done, and it was up to her to make things right. But she wasn't sure where to begin, how to undo the harm she had caused, or whether it was even possible to fix. She had ruined the play for everyone involved, and now the only thing left was to pick up the pieces. And even then, she knew it would take more than just an apology to make things right. The look on Jacob's face, the confusion in his eyes, was something she would carry with her for a long time. In trying to fight for his moment, she had taken it away from him, and in the end, that was something she would never be able to forget. Karen sat in the car, her hands gripping the steering wheel as she stared out the windshield, barely seeing the cars in front of her. The faint hum of the engine seemed to mock her, a constant reminder of what had just transpired. The drive home was long, but it felt endless. She could still feel the eyes of the audience on her, hear the murmurs of disapproval, the uncomfortable silence that had fallen over the auditorium as she made her scene. The moment she had stepped onto that stage, grabbed the lead role's costume, and demanded her son take the spotlight, it felt like time had frozen. The shock, the disbelief, the horror of it all, played on repeat in her mind, each moment growing more surreal as the reality of her actions sank in. She could still hear the principal's voice, the quiet reprimand, the disappointment in his eyes. She had ruined everything. Karen had always prided herself on being a force, on knowing what was right for her family, and especially for her son. But today, her sense of entitlement had led her astray, and now she was left with nothing but the shame of her actions. She had convinced herself that she was doing what was best for Jacob, that he deserved the lead role more than anyone else, but in doing so, she had taken away the very thing that should have made him proud. She had stolen the moment from him, and in the process, she had embarrassed him in front of the whole school. She could still see his face, a mixture of confusion and discomfort, as he had stepped onto the stage, caught in the middle of her outburst. She had put him in the spotlight, but not in the way she had imagined. She hadn't given him the confidence to shine, she had made him a part of the spectacle she had created. The guilt gnawed at her, and as she drove through the quiet streets, her thoughts turned to Jacob, to the phone call that she would need to make. She had promised herself that she would fix this, that she would explain to him what had happened, but deep down, she knew there was no way to undo the damage. There was no way to take back the scene she had caused. As a mother, she wanted to protect her son from the disappointment of it all, but she had failed him in the worst possible way. She had tried to give him something that wasn't hers to give, and now all she had left was the wreckage of her own making. When she finally arrived home, the house was silent. The lights were off, and there was no sign of Jacob. Her heart sank as she stepped inside, the weight of her failure pressing down on her chest. She called out his name softly, but there was no answer. She made her way up the stairs to his room, her footsteps echoing in the quiet house. She found him sitting on his bed, his head down, his shoulders hunched, as if he had been waiting for her. The silence between them was heavy, filled with all the things neither of them knew how to say. Karen stood in the doorway for a moment, taking in the sight of her son, his small form curled into himself, the disappointment written on his face clear for her to see. It was a look she had never wanted to see from him, and it shattered her. "I'm sorry, Jacob," Karen said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean for any of that to happen. I just wanted you to get your chance. I thought," she paused, struggling to find the right words, knowing they would never be enough to make up for what she had done. "I thought you deserved it, but I was wrong. I shouldn't have done that." Jacob didn't look up, but he didn't say anything either. The silence stretched on, thick and suffocating. It was as if he couldn't bring himself to speak, or maybe he just didn't know what to say. Karen felt the weight of it, the guilt, the shame, pressing down on her. She had hurt him in a way she couldn't undo, and she didn't know how to make it right. "I just wanted to help you," Karen continued, her voice trembling. "I thought if I could make them see how hard you've worked, how much you deserve it, things would be different. But I didn't think about how you might feel. I didn't think about what you needed. I was selfish, Jacob, and I'm so sorry." Jacob finally looked up at her, his eyes red-rimmed, but there was no anger in his gaze, only a quiet sadness. He said nothing for a long moment, and Karen stood there, waiting for him to speak, hoping he would say something to make it all better, to make her feel like she hadn't completely destroyed everything. But he just shook his head slowly, his voice small when he finally spoke. "I don't want to be in the spotlight, Mom. I just wanted to do my part in the play. I didn't need you to do all that. I don't need to be the lead. I just wanted to be part of it." His words stung, more than she had expected, and Karen felt the weight of his disappointment settle deep into her chest. She had thought she was doing what was best for him, but in the process, she had overlooked what he actually wanted. He didn't need her to fight his battles for him. He didn't need her to step in and make everything about her. "I'm so sorry, Jacob," Karen said again, her voice breaking. "I didn't understand. I wanted so much for you, but I didn't ask you what you wanted. I thought I knew what was best, and I was wrong. I'll never do it again, I promise." Jacob didn't respond right away. He just sat there, looking at her with an expression that was too mature for his age. Finally, he stood up, walking over to her and giving her a hug, his small arms wrapping around her tightly. "It's okay, Mom," he said softly. "I know you just wanted to help. I'm not mad. I just want things to be normal." Karen held him for a long moment, the weight of her failure still hanging over her, but for the first time since the play, she felt a flicker of relief. Maybe things wouldn't be the same. Maybe she had lost something important, something she couldn't fix, but at least she knew now. She had learned the hard way that sometimes, the best way to help your children wasn't by fighting their battles, but by letting them fight their own. She had crossed the line, but she could start over. She could do better. And with her son in her arms, she knew that no matter how much she had messed up, she still had the chance to make things right. As they stood there in the quiet of the house, Karen knew that the road ahead would be different. She would have to rebuild the trust that she had shattered, but for the first time in a long while, she wasn't afraid of the work it would take. She had learned the hard way that sometimes, love wasn't about doing what you thought was best, it was about listening, understanding, and letting go. She wasn't perfect, but for the first time, she was willing to try again.